The red warning lights bathed the radar control room in an ominous glow as Captain Sarah Martinez stared at the blank screens that should have been tracking aircraft movements across Southern California airspace. For the third consecutive day, the most advanced radar system on the West Coast had gone completely dark, leaving Marine Corps Air Station Camp Pendleton operating blind in one of the busiest air corridors in America. "Status report, Sergeant," Martinez called out, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere where a dozen technicians huddled around computer terminals, their faces illuminated by the harsh blue light of diagnostic screens. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez looked up from his workstation, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning running at full blast. "Ma'am, we've run every diagnostic protocol in the manual twice. The hardware checks out perfect, but the system won't initialize. It's like the computers are speaking a different language than the radar array." Martinez felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't just a technical malfunction, it was a national security issue. Camp Pendleton's radar coverage was crucial for monitoring civilian aircraft, military operations, and potential threats along the California coast. Every minute the system remained down increased the risk exponentially. The morning briefing had been brutal. General Patricia Williams, the base commander, had made it crystal clear that failure wasn't an option. The Pentagon was breathing down their necks, and the Federal Aviation Administration was threatening to reroute all commercial traffic if the radar wasn't operational within 48 hours. "What about the civilian contractors?" Martinez asked, pulling up the maintenance records on her tablet. "Northrop's team left yesterday afternoon," Rodriguez replied, shaking his head in frustration. "Their lead engineer said they'd never seen anything like it. The system is getting power, all connections are secure, but it's like there's some kind of invisible barrier preventing the software from communicating with the hardware." Martinez walked to the massive windows overlooking the radar installation. The enormous dish antenna stood motionless against the California sky, its sophisticated array of sensors and transmitters appearing deceptively simple from this distance. She knew that beneath that simplicity lay millions of dollars worth of cutting-edge technology that currently wasn't worth the metal it was built from. Antes de continuar, give us a like and subscribe to discover more stories of unsung heroes whose true value often hides behind humble appearances. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed General Williams' direct line, and Martinez felt her pulse quicken. "Captain Martinez speaking." "Captain, I need you in my office immediately." The general's voice was crisp and authoritative. "And bring your complete system failure report." 20 minutes later, Martinez stood at attention in the general's spacious office, watching as Williams reviewed the technical documentation with the focused intensity that had earned her 3 stars and the respect of every Marine under her command. "Captain, I've been in the Corps for 28 years, and I've learned that sometimes the newest technology requires the oldest wisdom," Williams said, closing the folder and looking directly at Martinez. "There's someone I want you to contact." The general pulled out a yellowed personnel file from her desk drawer, its edges worn from age and handling. "Master Sergeant William Bill Thompson, retired. He installed the original radar systems here back in 1987 and maintained them for 15 years before the digital upgrade." Martinez glanced at the black and white photograph clipped to the file. It showed a young Marine with intelligent eyes and calloused hands standing next to an early radar installation. "Ma'am, with respect, that system was completely replaced during the modernization program. The new technology operates on entirely different principles." Williams smiled knowingly. "That's exactly what the contractors said. But here's what they don't understand about men like Thompson. They don't just learn systems, they understand the soul of the machine. He's 72 years old now, lives about 30 miles from here in a small house in Oceanside. Every morning, he tends his garden and fixes neighbors' broken radios for free. You want me to contact a retired Marine to fix a billion-dollar radar system. Captain, I want you to contact the man who could make any piece of electronic equipment work with nothing but intuition, determination, and 40 years of experience. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology needs the simplest touch from the right hands. As Martinez left the general's office with Thompson's contact information, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were either about to witness a miracle or the most expensive lesson in military history about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. The modest house on Maple Street in Oceanside looked like countless others in the quiet residential neighborhood: single-story, beige stucco exterior, and a front yard that spoke of careful attention without ostentation. But as Captain Martinez approached the front door, she noticed details that set this home apart: the pristine condition of the satellite dish mounted on the roof, the neat arrangement of various antennas, and the soft sound of classical music emanating from what appeared to be a workshop in the garage. When the door opened, Martinez found herself face to face with a man whose appearance seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. Bill Thompson stood about average height, his gray hair neatly combed, wearing a simple flannel shirt and work pants that had seen better days. But his eyes, sharp, alert, and deeply intelligent, immediately commanded respect. "You must be Captain Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who chose his words carefully. General Williams called ahead. "Please come in." The interior of Thompson's home was a fascinating blend of military precision and civilian comfort. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, showing decades of Marine Corps service alongside pictures of grandchildren. But it was the study that caught Martinez's attention: walls lined with technical manuals spanning 40 years of radar technology, from vacuum tube systems to modern digital arrays. "Coffee?" Thompson asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "I imagine you've got quite a story to tell." As they settled into comfortable chairs with steaming mugs, Martinez found herself studying this man who General Williams believed could solve their crisis. Thompson's hands showed the calluses and scars of someone who'd spent decades working with machinery, but they moved with the precision of a surgeon. "Sir, I'll be direct," Martinez began. "Our radar system has been down for 3 days. We've exhausted every technical solution, and frankly, we're running out of time." Thompson nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me about the symptoms." For the next 20 minutes, Martinez detailed every aspect of the malfunction, from the initial failure to the diagnostic results. Thompson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a small pad with a pencil that looked older than some of the Marines on base. "And the contractors?" Thompson asked when she finished. "Northrop Grumman sent their best team. They're completely stumped." Thompson chuckled softly, but not unkindly. "Those young engineers, they know everything about how the system should work. Problem is, machines don't always do what they should do. They do what they want to do, and sometimes you have to ask them nicely." Martinez felt a flicker of hope. "So you'll help us?" Thompson stood and walked to his window, gazing out at his meticulously maintained garden. "Captain, I haven't set foot on a military installation in 7 years. I'm an old man who spends his days growing tomatoes and fixing radios for neighbors who can't afford to buy new ones. Sir, General Williams says you're the best radar technician the Corps ever had." Patricia always was generous with her praise. Thompson smiled at the memory. "But that was a long time ago. Technology has moved forward. I've moved backward." Martinez leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Thompson, I've read your service record. 15 years maintaining radar systems that never failed, not once. You have an intuitive understanding of electronics that can't be taught in any school." Thompson turned back to face her, and she could see the internal struggle playing out in his expression. "Captain, what if I can't fix it? What if the old Marine is just old? Then we'll be no worse off than we are now," Martinez replied honestly. "But if you can fix it, you'll be saving more than just a radar system. You'll be protecting thousands of people who depend on that coverage every day." The room fell silent, except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Thompson walked to a framed photograph showing him as a young sergeant standing next to an early radar installation, his uniform crisp and his face filled with the confidence of youth. "I suppose I could take a look," he said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I work alone initially. Too many people offering suggestions just creates noise. Second, if I determine the problem is beyond my capabilities, we call it off immediately. No heroics, no false hope." Martinez stood and extended her hand. "Agreed." As Thompson shook her hand, she felt the strength in his grip and saw a familiar spark in his eyes, the look of a Marine accepting a mission. "Give me an hour to gather some tools," Thompson said, "and Captain, don't expect miracles. Expect hard work, patience, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of old-fashioned Marine Corps ingenuity." The security checkpoint at Camp Pendleton hadn't seen anything quite like Bill Thompson in recent memory. The elderly civilian in his worn work clothes, carrying a battered toolbox that looked like it had survived several wars, seemed almost comically out of place among the crisp uniforms and high-tech equipment that defined the modern military installation. Captain Martinez watched the guards' reactions as Thompson presented his temporary clearance. Their expressions shifted from mild curiosity to barely concealed skepticism when they learned this unassuming retiree was here to fix their billion-dollar radar system. "First time back in 7 years," Thompson murmured as they drove through the base, his eyes taking in the new buildings and updated facilities. "Amazing how much can change and how much stays exactly the same." The radar control room buzzed with nervous energy when they arrived. Word had spread quickly through the technical staff that some retired Marine was coming to attempt what their best engineers couldn't accomplish. Sergeant Rodriguez and his team stood clustered around their workstations, their body language clearly expressing doubt about this unconventional solution. "Gentlemen," Martinez announced, "this is Master Sergeant Thompson, retired. General Williams has asked him to assess our situation." The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson seemed completely unfazed by the reception, setting his toolbox down with deliberate care and surveying the room with the methodical gaze of someone conducting a thorough reconnaissance. "Son," Thompson addressed Rodriguez directly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened when the system first failed." Rodriguez glanced at Martinez, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, sir, it was during the routine midnight diagnostic cycle. Everything was running normally, then suddenly all displays went dark. No warning alarms, no error messages, just nothing." Thompson nodded, pulling a small notebook from his shirt pocket. "And the weather that night?" "Weather?" Rodriguez looked puzzled. "It was clear, sir. No storms or anything unusual." "Humidity level?" "I'm not sure why that would matter for a sealed electronic system." Thompson smiled gently. 40 years of working with these machines teaches you that everything matters, especially the things that shouldn't." Over the next hour, Thompson asked questions that ranged from routine technical inquiries to seemingly random observations about building maintenance, recent construction projects, and even the base's power grid history. The younger Marines exchanged glances that clearly communicated their growing conviction that the old man was out of his depth. Finally, Thompson opened his toolbox and withdrew instruments that looked ancient compared to the sleek diagnostic equipment surrounding them. His multimeter was analog with a needle display. His oscilloscope was portable and clearly dated from the 1980s, and his collection of hand tools showed decades of careful use and maintenance. "Sir," Rodriguez ventured carefully, "our diagnostic computers can run thousands of tests simultaneously. They're connected directly to the system's internal monitoring network." "That's the problem," Thompson replied, connecting his oscilloscope to an access panel that the contractors had largely ignored. "You're asking the patient to diagnose itself. Sometimes you need an outside perspective." The room fell silent as Thompson began his examination, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd performed these procedures countless times. He didn't consult manuals or computer screens. Instead, he listened to the subtle sounds of the equipment, felt for vibrations that others might miss, and watched his analog instruments with the intensity of a cardiologist reading an EKG. "Captain," Thompson said, after 30 minutes of methodical testing, "I need to see the main power distribution panel for this building." "The electrical contractors checked all the power systems twice," Martinez replied. "Everything tested normal." "I'm sure it did," Thompson acknowledged, "but normal and right aren't always the same thing." They descended to the building's basement, where Thompson examined the main electrical panel with the same careful attention he'd given the radar equipment. His analog multimeter probed various circuits while he muttered calculations under his breath. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a specific breaker. "Circuit 7B. When was the electrical work done on this building?" Martinez consulted her tablet. "Major renovation completed 6 months ago, all new wiring and upgraded power systems." Thompson nodded grimly. "And I'll bet the contractors were very proud of their efficiency improvements. They saved the base 30% on electrical costs." "At what frequency does your radar system's primary processing unit operate?" 60 gigahertz, Rodriguez answered, having followed them downstairs. Thompson's expression grew more serious, and the new LED lighting system they installed throughout the building. Martinez pulled up the renovation specifications. High-efficiency units operating at 60 gigahertz frequency. The implications hit Rodriguez first. The lighting system is creating electromagnetic interference. "Not just interference," Thompson explained, "harmonic resonance. The lights in the radar are singing the same song, but they're drowning each other out. Your diagnostic computers can't detect it because they're measuring the system when the lights are dimmed for optimal screen visibility." For the first time since the crisis began, Martinez felt genuine hope. "Can you fix it?" Thompson hefted his toolbox with a slight smile. "Son, I've been fixing impossible problems since before these computers were even dreamed of. But first, I need everyone to understand that the solution isn't going to be high-tech. It's going to be old-fashioned Marine Corps improvisation." The next morning brought an unusual sight to Camp Pendleton's radar facility. Master Sergeant Thompson arriving before dawn with additional equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum of electronics history. His 1987 pickup truck was loaded with components that the younger Marines couldn't immediately identify: metal boxes with analog dials, coils of copper wire in various gauges, and what appeared to be hand-wound transformers. "What's all this equipment, sir?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked as they helped Thompson unload his supplies. "Filters," Thompson replied simply. "When you can't eliminate the noise, you learn to tune it out." Captain Martinez had spent most of the night researching electromagnetic interference solutions, trying to understand how Thompson had diagnosed in hours what teams of engineers had missed entirely. The technical manuals were filled with complex mathematical formulas and sophisticated computer modeling programs, but none of them addressed the elegant simplicity of Thompson's approach. "The contractors want to install a $250,000 EMI suppression system," Martinez reported as Thompson began arranging his equipment. "They say it'll take 3 weeks to design and 6 weeks to install." Thompson chuckled while examining the building's electrical systems with his analog instruments. "Captain, during the Gulf War, we had radar systems that needed to work in sandstorms that could strip paint off vehicles. We didn't have million-dollar solutions or 6-week timelines. We had Marines who understood that sometimes the best answer is the simplest one." Over the following hours, Thompson worked with the focused intensity of someone half his age. His approach seemed almost mystical to the watching technicians. He would test circuits, make notes in his weathered notebook, and then construct small electronic devices using components that appeared nearly obsolete. Sir, Rodriguez ventured, I don't understand how those old components can interface with our modern systems. Thompson paused in his work, holding up a hand-wound inductor that looked like something from a 1950s radio. Son, electricity hasn't changed since Benjamin Franklin flew his kite. The principles are exactly the same whether you're working with vacuum tubes or quantum processors. The only difference is how fancy we make the packaging. What followed was an impromptu education in practical electronics that none of the Marines would ever forget. Thompson explained how electromagnetic fields interacted, how harmonic frequencies could interfere with each other, and how proper filtering could isolate signals without expensive computer controls. The new lighting system isn't defective, Thompson explained as he installed one of his custom filters in the main power panel. It's actually working perfectly. The problem is that nobody considered how it would interact with the radar's processing frequency. The young Marines watched in fascination as Thompson connected his analog filters to various points in the electrical system. Each filter was slightly different, hand-tuned to address specific frequency ranges that his testing had identified as problematic. This is like watching someone perform surgery with antique instruments, one technician whispered to another. Thompson overheard and smiled. Sometimes the old tools work better because they were designed when people had to understand what they were doing instead of relying on computers to do the thinking for them. By noon, Thompson had installed 7 different filters throughout the building's electrical system. His modifications looked deceptively simple, small metal boxes connected with standard wiring, but each one had been precisely calculated to address specific interference patterns. All right, Thompson announced, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen considerable use. Let's see if we can wake up your sleeping giant. The control room fell silent as Thompson approached the main console. Instead of using the standard startup sequence, he began bringing systems online one at a time, monitoring each stage with his analog instruments while watching for the subtle signs that had guided his career. Primary power stable, he reported, though his instruments showed readings that the digital diagnostics couldn't detect. Signal processing unit initializing, frequency filters engaged. The massive displays flickered once, twice, then suddenly blazed to life with more clarity than anyone had seen since the installation was first completed. The radar dish outside began its slow rotation, and within minutes, aircraft contacts appeared across the screen with perfect definition. Contact bearing 270, altitude 23,000, speed 480 knots, Rodriguez read from his display, his voice filled with amazement. Captain Martinez felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her knees weak. Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you. Thompson was already packing his tools, his expression showing satisfaction but not surprise. Captain, you don't need to thank me. You just need to remember that sometimes the most complex problems have simple solutions, and sometimes the best technology is the kind that lets Marines do their jobs without getting in the way. As the radar system continued operating flawlessly, displaying air traffic across Southern California with crystal clarity, the young Marines began to understand that they had witnessed something remarkable. The application of knowledge, experience, and intuition that couldn't be programmed into any computer or taught in any manual. 3 days later, the radar control room at Camp Pendleton hummed with the smooth efficiency that had been missing for nearly a week. The displays showed clear, precise tracking of air traffic across Southern California, and the system's performance metrics were actually better than they had been before the failure. General Williams stood beside Captain Martinez, both women watching the seamless operation with the satisfaction of a crisis successfully resolved. The Pentagon had called off their emergency protocols, the FAA had restored normal air traffic patterns, and most importantly, the critical radar coverage that protected millions of civilians was fully operational. The Northrop contractors want to study Thompson's modifications, Martinez reported, consulting her tablet. They're calling it revolutionary analog-digital integration and want to implement similar solutions at other installations. Williams smiled knowingly. I'm sure they do, and I'm equally sure Bill Thompson will be politely uninterested in their corporate consulting offers. At that moment, Thompson himself entered the control room, carrying his weathered toolbox and looking exactly as unremarkable as he had when this crisis began. The young Marines working at their stations immediately stood to attention, their respect for the elderly veteran now absolute and unquestioned. "At ease," Thompson said gently. "Just wanted to check on how everything's running." Sergeant Rodriguez approached with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered a new mentor. "Sir, the system's been perfect for 72 hours straight. No fluctuations, no interference, nothing." "Good," Thompson nodded, then paused thoughtfully. "But remember, son, perfect doesn't mean permanent. These filters will need maintenance, and someday they'll need replacement. When that time comes, don't just call the contractors. Think about what you've learned, trust your instincts, and remember that the best solutions usually aren't the most expensive ones." Martinez stepped forward, holding an official document. "Mr. Thompson, General Williams has authorized a substantial consulting fee for your services. The Marines don't forget their debts." Thompson glanced at the paperwork, then gently pushed it back toward Martinez. "Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but I didn't do this for money. I did it because Marines take care of Marines, active duty or retired." "Sir," Rodriguez interjected, "the contractors were estimating a $250,000 fix that would have taken 2 months. You solved it in 2 days with equipment that probably cost less than $1,000. Thompson's expression grew serious. "Son, you're missing the point. This wasn't about saving money or time, though those are nice benefits. This was about understanding that experience and wisdom have value that can't be measured in dollars or gigahertz." Williams stepped forward, her command presence filling the room. "Thompson, you've reminded us all of something we sometimes forget in our rush toward the latest technology. The human element, knowledge, intuition, and practical experience remains irreplaceable." "General, with respect, I didn't remind you of anything you didn't already know," Thompson replied. "You just needed someone old enough to remember when we solved problems by thinking instead of by buying new equipment." As Thompson prepared to leave, Rodriguez approached with obvious reluctance to see him go. "Sir, would you be willing to come back sometime? Maybe show us more about analog systems and practical troubleshooting?" Thompson considered the request carefully. "Tell you what, Sergeant, every Saturday morning I'm in my garage workshop. Any Marine who wants to learn about electronics the old-fashioned way is welcome to stop by. Bring your questions, bring broken equipment, and bring your curiosity." Martinez watched this exchange with deep appreciation for what had transpired. In a world increasingly dominated by digital solutions and corporate contractors, Thompson had demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable resource was sitting quietly in a modest house in Oceanside, tending a garden and fixing neighbors' radios. "There's one more thing," Williams said as Thompson reached the door. "The Corps is instituting a new program, pairing experienced retirees with our technical staff for complex problem-solving. We'd like you to be our first official consultant." Thompson paused, considering the offer. "Only if I can do it my way, General. No committees, no bureaucracy, just old Marines helping young Marines figure out how to make things work." "Agreed," Williams replied immediately. As Thompson's pickup truck disappeared through the base gates, Martinez realized they had all learned something invaluable. In an age of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, the most sophisticated problem-solving tool remained the human mind, experienced, intuitive, and humble enough to listen to what the machines were trying to say. The radar continued its steady rotation against the California sky, its electronic eyes watching over millions of people who would never know how close they had come to losing that protection, or how an unassuming retiree had restored it with nothing more than knowledge, dedication, and the quiet confidence that comes from 40 years of making impossible things work. Rodriguez looked up at the displays showing clear air traffic patterns and smiled. Tomorrow was Saturday, and he already knew where he would be spending his morning.